welcome to the stage. Thank you for coming.
Thank you for the invitation.
So why don't we jump right in with how did you come to the CTO role, the CDO role? Excuse me.
How the way I arrived in CDO role is by hazard, by chance, I would say. More or less 2.5 years ago, one of the number 2 of BNP Paribas decided to launch a group of reflection with the head of the entities of BNP Paribas in Europe to reflect on what should be the position of the entities of BNP Paribas for retail in their domestic market, and what's the transformation program they should launch in order to be there in 2020. So they started to reflect. So at that time we are early 2015, and the words data management, data governance, analytics, artificial intelligence start to pop up, and nobody understands what it means. So it's strange now because, and obviously in a room like this one, everybody masters these words and these concepts. But 2 years ago, in that room with all these executives, it meant nothing. I was around, and that guy asked me, "Luca, could you take the topic and could you explain me in bilateral what does it mean?" So I started to work on that. I have made the round of all these executives in their countries, and progressively started to understand that data starts to be a topic. We have a lot of data in the banks. They know that they use it on a day-to-day basis, but how they can leverage it a bit better, that was completely not known for them. Then in a big group like BNP Paribas, and I think it's the same in all the big groups in whatever is the industry, you have quite a lot of politics. You have a big group, but the local entities like to take to keep their independence. So rather quickly they understood that data management was important for them. You have to have in mind that we have legacy systems that are older than me, still in production. So you can imagine the data flows there, the data treatment there. So they quickly understood that having a reflection, a mutualized reflection on data management was most probably interesting because it's boring. So if someone can do it for them.
It's interesting because it's boring.
Yeah, so it's interesting, it's boring, so if you can do it for everybody, please do it. Then for the analytics, it's our agility. Someone was spoken about agility. That was already hype at that time. They wanted to do it on their side. 2 years ago, I can tell you they changed their mind. They see that it's difficult. The access to the skills is rather difficult in the financial environment. So we started to have common reflection on that as well.
So it seems like you kind of walked out of a meeting and they said, "What did he say? I don't know, but he sounds really smart. Let's make him in charge of that stuff."
Exactly, and then we have decided, we started from the basic. We didn't reinvent the wheel, but we have defined what all these this terminology means for BNP Paribas. So I've defined what's a CDO, to who he has to report to, what's his perimeter, from where to start.
Now, how many CDOs are there in BNP?
One in each legal entities.
Okay, so gross total of?
For BNP Paribas domestic market, so domestic market are the retail entities of BNP Paribas in the main European countries. We speak about 8 or 9.
8 or 9. Okay. Do you have a CDO, a super CDO over the CDOs?
No, it was one of the first decisions we took because the data are kept in each countries. On the retail market, we don't cross-sell cross-border. So there was no usage nor interest to have a kind of global CDO, but we have a CDO community that we rename as a management team to be more serious.
Okay. And you each report into a business general manager of some sort of business unit?
Actually, in each entity you have a CEO, because these entities are legally independent.
Sure.
And each CDO report to its CEO.
Excellent. And do you feel like that's the right reporting structure? That's well
Yeah,
aligned?
it has been discussed several times today. Yes, especially because we started mainly from data management and then from regulatory topics. Things were started as well on the marketing side with topics like at BBC. If you put this topic on the marketing side, then you will be in trouble with the regulatory topics. If you put it on the CFO, CRO side, and innovation,
Right.
taking care of the business can perceive as difficult. So the CEO, at the level of maturity we were, and at this point of time, digital transformation, etc., seems to be the best position.
Interesting. So let's look back on this first year. So you've been doing this about a year, about 13 months, I believe we talked about?
Yes, exactly.
So looking back on this year, where are you versus the destination you would? So first of all, in your first 100 days, did you set a destination where you think you'd be at this point?
Yeah, that's interesting. I have it in mind, but I had to jungle a bit with the expectation of my stakeholders. I started to make a round with all my colleagues at the C-level, and when I met the head of legal, of head of compliance, the CRO, the CFO, they said, hopefully someone that will take care of our regulatory project, and hopefully we will deliver them on quality and on time. And then, you know, it's important to go, because if we are not compliant, we can close the shop. Then I went to the head of marketing, chief customer officer, my boss, the CEO, who is a kind of marketing guy, and told me, his expression was, with you here, I don't want to speak anymore about the GAFA. I want to speak about the GAFAC, with a C at the end, and with a C at the end, because personal investors actually is a business line operating in 4 countries in Europe, and one of the brands we have in Germany is Consorsbank. So he was dreaming about being the digital bank recognized for the usage of the data like a GAFA, like Google, Amazon, Facebook, or Apple. So are you crazy, guy? We would never do that. So, you know, the expectations were very, very wide. The level of understanding of what's a CDO, what is perimeter, was rather low, because it was a decision from the top in BNP Paribas to have a CDO with that perimeter, etc. So my first 100 days has been about evangelization of my stakeholders, having my agenda. On the regulatory side, I mean, the agenda is obvious. On the business side, I've started by measuring the appetite they have for the data. So I've played games with them in order to define their appetite.
So you set sort of loose goals for your first year and your first 100 days. And how are you tracking against the sort of loose goals that you had for your first year?
So again, regulatory topics, you have deadlines, etc. That's rather easy. The way we measure progresses on data management, data governance, is that we have defined a kind of KPIs, some qualitative measures and quantitative measures as well, depending on the size of the organization, and we leverage the regulatory project in order to spread out the data management and data governance across the organization. So
I'm going to get my phone so I can answer questions that come up, but please go ahead. On that topic, so, and I know we didn't discuss this previously, but see, the GDPR requires that there's a DPO, a data protection officer, in each jurisdiction. Does that fall within the CDAO office in BNP Paribas?
No, within BNP Paribas, the DPO will be under the risk department. He will be responsible.
Chief risk officer in each division as well.
Exactly. He will be responsible for the second line of defense, while the CDO will be responsible for the organization of the first line of defense.
And do you think that's a common structure across the banking industry, or does everybody tackling it differently?
I think that everybody is tackling it differently. This is a decision of BNP Paribas. GDPR does not tell anything about that. I don't know yet how the other banks or the other industries are doing, but this is the decision of BNP Paribas.
Yeah, I'm just laughing because, across, 99 articles, 88 pages and 99 articles. One of the strict mandates is that you must be very, very clear in your definitions with regard to how you handle GDPR, yet the whole code is written in a very unclear fashion.
Yeah, that's definitely. It is really, really interesting the way you interpret. If colleagues have some interpretation, I would be happy to know the way we interpret a similar product. When you speak about upselling or cross-selling, is completely different. For example, in France, in Germany, in the same industry and in the same bank within BNP Paribas. Really interesting.
Do send in your questions, by the way, via the app. So looking back, this is a fun question. So looking back, what would you tell yourself a year ago?
So a year ago, I was really, really excited.
Young and naive, clearly.
Really excited. I mean, you cannot do something wrong in a bank with the data. You use them, but I mean, when I speak about more on the analytics side, I mean, they didn't know what was possible, and so it's why I've started by to start to measure their appetite and to, as someone said as well in the afternoon, to be the one that brings some ideas and to see what does it mean for them, and does this see any value out of that. So it means that I had my appraisal 1 month ago with my boss, and he told me, what do you think about your year? I've said, I have most probably achieved half of what I wanted to do, but I have most probably achieved 10 times what you expected from me.
And that was accurate.
Yeah.
So what, do you think of a CDO role as sort of a generic set of competencies you could say are required by the CDO, or do you think it's different for every organization?
It's really interesting question. For what I see within BNP Paribas, out of the 8 or 9 people I referred to previously, only one is a real professional. All the other has different background. I came lately in the banking industry. I'm a mathematician. I've made a PhD in mathematics. We have a former CFO. We have a nuclear physician. Physicist. So very, very different background. I think that one of the main skill a CDO should have in an environment like BNP Paribas is to be curious and convincing for his stakeholder, mm-hmm. and then being, conscious that he cannot master all these things. Mm-hmm. They are professionals, they are data scientists, that are data engineers, there are people mastering technologies, there are people mastering things like the colleague from BBC explained, marketing and things like that. It's about letting work all these people together, but setting objectives and making sure that it's done at the right speed, according to the, at least for BNP Paribas, according to the transformation of the company.
Is there what you would think of as a typical career path for a CDO?
May I say I don't know?
Yeah, that's fair. I think actually that's kind of the point of the question.
Yeah.
It seems that, well, as we've talked about, nuclear physicists, CFO, mathematician, PhD mathematician, they come from all walks, but the commonalities you've discussed, sort of being able to talk convincingly, being able to be a leader and understanding the data. Anything else you'd add to that in terms of common capabilities?
No, that's already a lot. And but to be honest, that's a really good question. It's a question I have for myself as well. What would be the next job people will think for me, having been a CDO?
Like what the career path is. So where do you go from here?
Exactly.
Do you have any guesses as to where you would go from here?
To be honest, no.
Now, what about the other way, the career path coming up to your position? So what would you think if you were talking to a brand new grad school ambitious that wants to be a CDO one day?
So I think that more and more people will look at people having quants, so mathematical or scientific background to work on that area, because I think that things related to data management are now, I mean, it's old, it's a whole topic. Renewed, the importance has been renewed because, again, digitalization and things like that. Big organizations are able to structure themselves, etc. So it will become a commodity. While I think that things related to analytics, etc., will still take time, at least in the financial industry, to evolve, and then they will look for people being able to understand that, so more scientific background.
Now, broadly speaking, what are the functions in your organization, if you were to think of grouping them into a few areas or several areas?
In the CDAO?
In the CDAO organization, that report into you?
Sorry, I have another
The functions that report into you, is there analytics?
To me, yes. I have the data governance, data management. I have the data scientists, I would say few, because again, it's difficult to attract them in the financial industry.
It's difficult to attract data scientists in the financial industry?
Definitely. They are not
Really?
interested to come in the financial industry, at least in the classical banks.
But that's where the money is.
Yeah, but it's not where the funny usage of the data are.
There's not data that's as exciting in the banking.
Yeah, exactly. And I mean, what you have in the banks, and again in the classical banks, it's rather difficult to differentiate the career path, the way you pay or you incentivize people, etc. And data scientists are not incentivized like people are used to be incentivized in the financial industry.
How interesting! I wouldn't have guessed that. So, what advice would you have for new CDOs in the audience?
Oh, I don't know if I have an advice, but at least if you are a CDO in an environment like I am at the moment, is to keep your smile to avoid frustration. Because there are a lot to do. Everybody is speaking about that, but it's rather difficult to let them walk the talk. And the main reason, I think, and I would be very happy to share that with some of you, is actually using more data and creating more and more insight, change the rules of the games in order to decide, the way you decide. Very, very often in my environment, decisions are taken by people that have a lot of experience. And so they, of course, at that level, they are intelligent guys, or we can assume that, and they have an experience, so they decide with their head and with their gut, but much more with their gut than with their head, actually.
Or just sort of pray.
Exactly. And actually, what they were used, because we have a lot of data, of course, they use their data to explain the past, and based on the experience they have of the past, they take decisions for the future. Now, with all this insight, you are able to
And this is from the industry that I think has a specific statement that says past performance does not predict future returns.
Yeah.
Isn't that like a thing in your industry?
Yeah. I mean, you know how it happens. And then now you bring them information and you put them completely in a comfortable situation where they should look at this factual information in order to take decision. So they still want to avoid a little bit that.
Well, Asin, this is a good question that came in from the audience. How do you stay up to date? So CDO, you're kind of required to be on top of innovation, on top of what's changing in the environment. What do you do to stay on top of the technology and what's going on?
I try to come to some events like this one. Try to read. I think it's
besides the CXO hangouts, of course, Sarah. Yes.
No, I think it's really evolving. So it's really a matter of staying in contact, being curious, and really always having in mind that you don't know. You master something. I mean, it's the way I take. I've made a PhD. I don't use the mathematics I've learned or I've tried to do. I most probably have developed the skills to be able to understand something. And it's exactly, perhaps to come back to one of your previous questions, one of the skills that a CDO should have is ability to learn and to learn fast.
And how do you do, so I know you've been in banking for a long time, but how do you
10 years.
envision that the roles are different, like a CDO, when you speak to your colleague CDOs in other industries? How does their role differ from yours in your estimation?
I don't think it depends on the industry. Actually, I think it depends on the way the companies are organized. The CDOs doesn't have always the same perimeter. Sometimes they have the data scientists with them, sometimes not. Sometimes they have the architects with them, sometimes not. Sometimes they have the BI people, sometimes not. Right. So it really depends on the way the company is organized. And I don't think that it's depending on the industry.
Interesting. So there's probably a lot of people in the audience that are not formally named the CDO or the CAO. And they're growing into that role, or their organization doesn't have a formal role like that. What advice would you have to those people to help them build the business case for their being a CDO in their company?
I think it is something that has been said this afternoon as well. I think that the key is to bring to create value, and to demonstrate that to create value, and to demonstrate that you solve their problem. You're not there to be to put in place a theory. I will come and I will give you data management, or I come and I will tell you next year we do that with the analytics, and second year we do that, etc. No, you have to solve them, and as said by you, I think, this afternoon, you have to have in mind your goal, your roadmap, but each and any action you take should be a step with a creation. You should put it in production, and it should create value, and then you go to the next step. And
so an iteration.
Approach, and
yeah.
everybody doesn't need the full picture actually, because for some of them it will be a fear, I think.
Now, what do you do to manage expectations within the business units? So they come to you and they might have sort of a wild expectation of what they can get out of the data, and you have to sort of level set. How do you go about level setting the people around the business units, the different heads within the unit?
Well, for some of them, I have to shake them to raise some ambition, and some of them I have to.
I don't know how the Germans react to that. It's a very Italian way to interact with the.
Yeah, exactly. I know you have mentioned all these European countries, and I'm working with India as well, because we have.
Of course.
We have an entity in India, so it's also completely different. Sky is really the limit. And no, it's really, in terms of stakeholder management, it's completely different depending on their understanding, the way they were used to work. I'm more or less requests coming from the risk department or the compliance in order to help them to improve fraud detection than sometimes from the marketing area.
And would you say, who do you think of those areas as sort of pushing the envelope the most in what the data is capable of? Is risk, marketing, sales? I have fraud prevention, I would assume, is under risk.
Yes. So it's a bit more. It's still a bit more from the risk finance and the function side than the business side. Still, but it's evolving. It's evolving a bit more, and I hope that I'm a bit responsible of that, at least in my entities, of moving a little bit the cursor from the business on the business side.
Now, the CDO role has probably only existed meaningfully for 3-ish years, right? Maybe 5 in some organizations. Is this the role you were aiming for? Did you sit down years ago and say, right, chief data, that sounds like that's what I want to be?
Not years ago. When I started to work after 6 months, I have to say that I had in mind that that could be a real cool position for me because it's most probably the only position where I could use my scientific background in a bank.
Okay. And sort of, so bringing your own personal background together. So it's a personal background story, it sounds like, in a lot of the types of CDO roles. Great. Any other questions from the audience? You'd love to ask verbally, yes. Go ahead. No, go ahead. You just have to say, I'll repeat your question. I'll repeat his question, Sarah, it's okay.
In terms of AI and machine learning, how much do you see your work out
In banking or in BNP? Okay, so let me just repeat the question. So how do you see AI evolving within the CDO function and across your team? First of all, do the data scientists report to you?
Yes.
They do? Okay.
Yes. So no, I think it's definitely really important. I think that in a bank, machine learning will be as important as BI has been used to be, especially because with BI, you were able to master what happened and to explain what happened. With machine learning now, you will be able to master and to define what will happen. And it's where the trick is now. So machine learning, definitely. Then AI in banks and actually in every industries, I think, where you have repetitive tasks, big back office, etc. AI will be used to bring efficiencies there. Everything that can be done repetitively by a human, we will try to do it with AI. We have a lot of complaints, so using AI to be able to categorize these templates, perhaps having standards, answers, etc., we can improve drastically the efficiency. This is definitely in the agenda of the CDO in my case.
So looking across those things, AI, Hadoop, Spark, data lakes, what do you think is sort of the most overhyped technology that you hear about? What are you tired of hearing about as a CDO?
In my case, and because of my background, I rely on my CIO to understand this and to make sure I have choices. As said before as well, I'm considering as the first business user of these kinds of this kind of thing. There was a question before. It's why do you think that we data are there since ever? Why are we speaking about that? It's because technology. It's because technology is evolving that these topics are coming back. So in my case, technology is for my CIO. I let him decide what's the best according to the needs I define for him. So I escape a little bit your question.
That's okay. So it was a good roundabout. So this is kind of the last question. So as a CDO, you get asked questions from other parts of the business all the time. What's your go-to strategy to sort of tackle a problem you don't know the answer to? I mean, is it, I would go to spreadsheets, I go to my CIO, I start asking the data scientist. I mean, there's a number of things you could do, but do you have a go-to sort of, this is where I would head if I was asked a question I didn't have an answer to?
No. I use my scientific background. I collect information. I try to get, and when I say it's my team. We try to get as much as feelings, understanding what the business has to do, and then we put that aside and we look at the data, and we start to, and we try to see if they start to have some matching or not at all, and then we stop, and with some preliminary analysis, we show them to the business, and we try to iterate. And I have the opportunity to have in my team some people that are very, I would say between brackets, old in the company, so they know very well the business. So it helps as well to make these links. And I think that's one of the key in the CDO in the CDO team, it's having people being able to speak with the stakeholders, because you could have Ayatollah of the data management, things like that, and then they define things on paper and nothing happen on the ground. And you can have data scientists making great things, but completely enabled to speak with the people. So you really need a layer in order to be able to understand the needs, and then when you have defined something, when you have found something, being able to, between brackets, to sell it, to explain them why this is the right way to find the answer, and finally to get the answer.
And just to clarify, how big is your organization? How many people work for you?
So spread over the 4 entities I'm responsible for, in Germany, India mainly, and a little bit in Spain and in Austria. We speak about a bit less than 40 people.
40 people. And do you think that's common for a business of your size? Do you think it's not enough? Do you think it's more than enough? Just right.
I would say it's not enough, of course.
Of course.
It seems big relatively to the size of these entities, but it's mainly because I have as well people responsible for some regulatory project. So this is not in the run. It's people working on some project like GDPR, on project like IFRS 9. Like Anacredit or some reporting like that. So by using the money we can put to solve these regulatory topics, I try to leverage them in order to let evolve the data topics as well.
Outstanding. Final word, best advice for the audience of burgeoning CDOs, CAO, current CDOs, CAOs, kind of one sentence of advice, what would it be?
Take fun.
What?
Take fun.
Have fun doing it. Thank you very much. Thank you very much.